Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me for YIC and Prevention Mentor Webinar, session 47. Thanks for making time on an April morning. All right, let me get my screen advanced. There we go. So for this morning's agenda, as usual, I'll take care of our mindfulness moment and introduction of presenters. Our first presentation is going to be a review of the de-escalation strategies and then a deeper dive with some case studies. Following that, we're going to hear about the Caseworker Education Training Overview. Let me get those presenters introduced. So first we have Ashley Lauer, and Ashley is a dedicated behavior specialist at the Utah State Board of Education, where she focuses on providing general behavior support and promoting school-based mental health. With a wealth of experience as a school psychologist and recreational therapist, Ashley brings a unique perspective to her work. Ashley is deeply passionate about advocating for the needs of students throughout Utah. In her leisure time, Ashley enjoys traveling, spending quality time with her family, playing lacrosse, and exploring the beauty of the mountains. All right, and after Ashley, we will hear from Julia Armstrong. And there we go. Julia is a youth and care education specialist for the Utah State Board of Education, and Julia has served youth in state's custody for over 15 years. Prior to her current role as a YIC education specialist, Julia spent most of her career as a social worker for the Division of Child and Family Services. She worked directly with struggling families as well as trained and supervised DCFS staff. Julia feels honored to work with such a unique population of at-risk youth, and she learns more from them every single day. All right, so before I turn time over to Ashley, let's take a quick minute and have a mindfulness moment. Thought it was a perfect opportunity to to share in the chat springtime celebration, something that's happening great with a student, or maybe just something that's good happening in your personal life that you want to share with the group. So let me get the chat open here myself and share one that I had prepared. And while I do that, all right. Okay, got that in there. I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share so I can see everybody and the chat in whole. And that will also give Ashley a chance to get ready to share her screen. All right. All right. So it looks like Julia is cheering on kids for football, field football and on the basketball court. All right. Shirlene's got a new granddaughter born. Congratulations, Grandma. That's exciting. Looks like Garrett is hitting whitewater parks, skiing chutes, and running trails early with the morning birds. And Dave's spending time with family and enjoying being home. Dave, we might have to talk about what home means, my friend. And Ashley's been out skiing in the sunshine as well, cheering on kiddos playing lacrosse and volleyball. Ashley up in Price has been renovating her basement. Oh, good luck, Ashley. Anytime you do home remodeling is always such an exciting time. Annie has finally gotten to meet some of her students at Crimson. Congratulations, Annie. And you got a new granddaughter yesterday. Oh, it must be granddaughter season, it sounds like. All right, friends. Dawn has booked an Alaskan cruise. Ooh, we will need updates on that. Looks like Kelly's out coaching softball with some great girls, and Lisa just got back from a trip to Orlando. Ah, thank you so much for taking a quick moment to share some celebrations with us. Please keep adding them to the chat as we go along. I would love to read them as we go, but Ashley, feel free to go ahead and start your screen share and take over when you're ready.
Awesome. I absolutely love everything that everyone's been doing. That's fantastic. And it made me think of I'd love to go to some softball games. I'd love to go to Orlando. Like lots of wonderful things happening. Um, so thank you for allowing me to come back to this group with this check and connect mentors. Really excited to be with you today. We are going to, so back in December, I came to this group and we talked about de-escalation. We talked about how to support students who maybe have challenging behaviors and behaviors that kind of fall into the category of aggression, things of that nature. I know that not everyone was able to be at that webinar. I also know it's been a long time since that webinar. So what I wanted to do was start with just a quick review. It's always good to understand things again and to have things repeated. Maybe the first time there was information that didn't quite make sense, but hopefully with a repeat of some of the information that will kind of sink in a little bit more. And then we're going to spend time um, doing a deep dive, as Amanda said. I have two scenarios. One is an elementary scenario, one is a secondary scenario. And we're going to work through what the behaviors looked like along the crisis cycle, which is what we talked about. And then we're going to take some time looking at how can we respond as adults to help interrupt the crisis cycle, to help interrupt that behavioral emotional crisis and help support students. Throughout, if there's questions that come up, feel free to put them in the chat. Let me just open my chat really quickly so I make sure that I have that up and can see that. And then for those scenarios, we will go into breakout rooms so you can have a smaller group discussion. And then we will come back and discuss as a full group and kind of share together with that. Okay, so let's get started. Kind of went through those intentions already. We're going to start with reviewing just behavior fundamentals. We talked about last time just these foundational principles that behavior is communication. Whenever we're seeing behavior, whether it's a problem behavior, whether it's appropriate behavior, it's communicating something to us. So the more we can understand what's being communicated, the better we are able to support students and each other, because we all are also involved in interacting and exhibiting behaviors throughout the day. Behavior can be changed. So we do have strategies that we can use to support. It occurs in the context of the environment. That includes the physical environment. That includes our relationship to students. Anything in that environment can impact behavior. It is learned and also can be unlearned, which is really important. We can bring a student, we can teach skills so that they can replace that behavior if it's problem behavior that they've been doing and learn a new behavior to replace that. It all serves a purpose. We're going to talk about this just a little bit more in a second, but behavior has a function, and it usually falls into one of four categories when we're talking about the function of behavior. And then the more we can prevent behaviors from occurring and the more we can reinforce the behaviors we want to see in a student, the more we can kind of help a student learn a new pattern of behaviors. And then this is really important. A lot of time we focus on punishment, and it's important to realize that punishment does not teach new behavior. It can stop behavior from happening for a time, but it doesn't actually teach new behavior. So it's important that we use other strategies to support students so that we can see that behavior shift happen long term rather than just short term in the moment. Okay, so we talked about this as well, the ABC model of behavior. Behavior usually follows a pretty predictable pattern, and this is the model that conceptualizes that pattern. So what happens is, there's something in the environment that creates the condition for a person to respond in a certain way. This is what we call an antecedent. It's usually something, when we're talking about students, it's something the student wants to get or get away from. And when we're thinking of antecedents, it's something that sets up the behavior. Then we come to how the person responds. This is the actual behavior. When we're looking at it in terms of this model, the behavior is something that is observable and measurable. So it's something that we can actually see, and it's something that we can take data on to see how often it's happening, how long it's happening, things of that nature. And that behavior creates an impact on the environment, or it's something that immediately follows the behavior. So the way that we respond as adults, the way that peers respond, the way that the environment responds is the consequence. And that consequence, it's really important to note that that consequence lets the person know whether their behavior has worked or not. If they feel like it's worked, then they're going to continue to engage in that behavior. If they feel like it doesn't work, then it's less likely that that behavior will continue. And consequences is really important to recognize that it includes several things, right? It can include attention from someone that they want. It can include something like delaying work that they want to get out of, things of that nature. And then we'll come back, right? We have the ABC, but then there's something that happens well before the behavior, which is called a setting event. This is something that temporarily alters the value of a consequence, right? When we talk about an antecedent, that is something that kind of sets off a behavior, but a setting event is something that happens before that sets up a behavior. So this could be something like the student hasn't eaten in the morning before coming to school, or maybe they got in a fight with their parents before they came to school, or maybe they haven't been sleeping well. Maybe they're feeling sick. So those events, even though they're not directly related to the behavior, will impact the behavior and the consequences of the behavior. So it's important as we're thinking through, we're going to again talk about behavioral emotional crises specifically, that it's important to think through that, right? Something may have happened a long time before the behavior that's impacting it or setting off this cycle that happens. So again, we've got the setting event that happens well before, the antecedent that happens right before that kind of sets off the behavior. The behavior is the actual act that's happening, the observable, measurable act, and then the consequence is that response from the environment. Reinforcement and punishment. So this is specifically consequences, right? This is what's happening after the behavior, what we're responding to. And it's important to note when a behavior is increasing or continuing to occur, it's being reinforced in some way. And when we're looking at reinforcement and punishment, we're looking at what changes in the environment happen as a result of the behavior. And then also, what's the future probability that the behavior will continue? So reinforcement is that change that follows a behavior that increases the likelihood of behavior occurring again. And then we have the punishment. That is a change in the behavior that decreases the likelihood of the behavior occurring in the future. So just important to recognize that if the behavior is increasing, that means there's something that happened right after that behavior that is reinforcing to the person, in this case, to the students. If that behavior decreases, that means there's something after that behavior that was punishment for that student or that decreases the likelihood of that behavior continuing. So again, we talked about there's always behaviors, communication, it's always telling us something. So it's important to recognize that all behavior serves a function for that student. And again, as I said before, it really falls into 4 different categories for the most part. The first one is escape. So that means that the behavior allows the person to delay or avoid doing something, right? So maybe if a student yells in the classroom, is getting really upset and causing kind of a scene, they're yelling, and then they're asked to go out in the hallway. Well, maybe that's delayed them from doing the work that they didn't want to do. So they're escaping that behavior. The second one is attention. So the behavior gets an immediate reaction of some kind from others. In the same situation of a student yelling, if a teacher comes over or someone, an adult comes over, even if they're reprimanding the student or telling them, hey, we shouldn't do that, things of that nature, that could be allowing that student to get attention, the attention that they want, even though it's negative attention from the adult. And so that could be reinforcing that behavior because the function that they're trying to of the behavior is that attention. So it's really important to recognize if that behavior is increasing, was my attention, even though it was not the greatest attention, was that still what they were looking for? Then we come to tangible. Tangible is that they're doing a behavior to get access to some specific item or activity. Usually it's a preferred activity, a preferred item that they actually want to physically receive after that behavior that they do. That could be something like, right, a student does their all of their math work and then they're able to read this book that they really love after they finish that assignment. Or they have iPad time. That's a lot of what I think our students today want is they want access to something. And so that behavior is reinforced by that access. And then the last one is sensory automatic, and that is that the behavior helps the person meet their own physical need. This is often looks like um, so for certain students, right? Maybe it's the movement of their leg. There's a lot of students who, and I actually do this myself, but when I'm focusing on something, my leg is moving, and that movement actually helps me to focus and to do what I need. There are certain students who also do behavior. It's called stimming, or they're moving their hands, moving their body. That behavior actually gives them the stimulation they need. So that is the sensory or automatic function. So again, most behaviors uh, will happen because of one of these four functions. They're meeting one of these four functions. And again, all behavior, as we said, serves a function. So it's important to understand what function that might be serving. Okay, so we can intervene or support at any one of those four, right? When we're talking about the ABC model, any one of those four places. So first of all, we look at setting events, and this is minimizing the likelihood that a setting event or will impact the behavior or neutralizing the effects of a setting event. With setting events, this could be something like greeting the students at the door. So if they've had a really hard morning, just that greeting at the front of at the beginning of the day can help to support a student in going a different direction during the day, right? That's a beautiful thing about Check and Connect. You have these opportunities to interact with students and help neutralize some of the setting events that may have happened before school or earlier in the day. So a really great way to intervene. Or I say intervene, but I mean really support the student in the ways that they need. This could also be allowing snacks to be eaten at the beginning of the day. If someone hasn't eaten in the morning and you just give them a little snack, that can, change the trajectory of the day as well. Then we have antecedent events. Whoops, sorry about that. We'll come back there. Come back to antecedents. So this is reducing the likelihood of the problem behavior happening. So this is if we know what the antecedents are for the behavior, if we know what happens right before the behavior that predicts that behavior happening, we can adjust the antecedents. Maybe if it's asking them to do work that is really hard for them, maybe we can do something right before with that request. It's a request, but also providing support that will decrease the likelihood of that behavior happening. It could be as simple as reducing the clutter and distractions from the environment, right? If having too much stimulation in the environment, especially when certain requests happen, if you can decrease that, you can also decrease the likelihood of the behavior. And then we have behavioral teaching strategies. This is actually teaching new skills to a student, right? It's a way to make that problem behavior inefficient because you've taught them to do something that replaces that behavior that we're hoping to not see anymore. It's important to note as we're talking about behavioral emotional crises that we want to make sure that we aren't trying to teach during the crisis because, and we won't talk a lot about this, but because of what's happening in your brain when there's a behavioral emotion crisis happening, that's likely to either escalate the behavior or it's not actually going to, they're not actually going to be learning that behavior during that time. So it's important to do that at a time when a student is not in a behavioral emotional crisis. And then lastly, are consequence strategies. This is really ways to make the problem behavior ineffective. So you might pre-plan consequences for problem behavior um, to help support actually replacement behaviors or other behaviors that we want to see. This could be really being consistent with reinforcing classroom rules, procedures, and routines and things of that nature. And again, consequence strategies during, and we'll go over this cycle again, but during a peak of a behavioral emotional crisis, those consequence strategies are not going to be effective and they're probably likely to escalate a situation. That doesn't mean we don't give consequences. That means the consequences come after at a different time, not right in the moment when the crisis is happening. Okay, so let's review really quickly the behavioral emotional crisis and then de-escalation as well. So again, the way we define a behavioral emotional crisis is just a situation where a person's coping skills or their capacity to use those coping skills are overwhelmed. When this behavioral emotional crisis happens, it leads to a student or a person, right? But in this case, a student having less control of their actions. And then that escalation can come to a point where it poses a risk to either that student or other people that are around in the area. It is influenced by how well a person's needs are met. So again, when we're going to connect this back to the ABC model, some of those setting events, if some of those needs aren't met, those basic human needs aren't met, it's more likely that a behavioral emotional crisis will happen with a student. Again, it follows a crisis cycle. We'll review that in a minute. And this is a distinct and observable phases of escalation and de-escalation. And at each of those phases, there's an opportunity to interact with a student to support de-escalation. So sometimes the crisis itself is hard to predict, but the more we understand the antecedents and the setting events, the more we can predict when something might set off a student. And it's important to know that no one is immune to experiencing this type of crisis. I think we can all relate to a situation where maybe things have kind of stacked up and we feel really stressed out and maybe overwhelmed to where the way that we can usually manage our behavior becomes harder and harder, right? And so it's important to recognize that any student might experience this, and we as adults also may experience a behavioral emotional crisis. That doesn't mean we'll all get to the peak of the crisis, but there's always things that happen to us that may impact our experiencing a crisis of this nature. Okay, so let's just talk quickly about the crisis cycle. We are going to, when we go through the scenarios, we are going to use this crisis cycle to understand student behavior and then to understand the way that we as adults might respond when a student is in these different phases. So I will give you a worksheet that has these phases on it, as well as a place for you to be able to fill in some information, both about the behavior and about your response as an adult. So baseline. Baseline is when the student is behaving and responding to others in a way that shows they're comfortable and content. And we didn't, when kind of putting this together, we didn't use the word calm because sometimes a student's baseline, sometimes all of our baselines may not actually be calm, but it is content and comfortable. We all kind of have different baselines depending on just our own nature, our own way of being. So then we come to the catalyst. The catalyst is really an antecedent. So what is something that happened? It's something that's happened uh, in the environment that generates distress or anxiety. So something's happened and it's kind of setting someone off on that cycle. Escalation begins is that a student starts to show signs of distress. This can either be through behavior that we can see. That might be that maybe they're balling up their fists or their body, their movement of their body. They're becoming more agitated. You can see they're moving more in their body. It also could be internalizing. And that means that a student may have been interacting with other peers in the classroom, and then all of a sudden they're not interacting anymore, or their head has gone down, or right, there's physical signs that they are that there's escalation is beginning, but it's beginning internally instead of externally. Escalation intensifies. This is when the student's behavior or their emotional responses continues to escalate in frequency and intensity. So it might get louder, they might get louder, right? There might be physical aggression that's happening, could be ripping up papers. There's a variety of behaviors that could be happening, but it's more intense than the behaviors that were happening during escalation begins. And then we have the crisis peak. This is when those behaviors or emotional responses have peaked. Usually at this peak, there is an increased danger to other people or themselves. Usually when there's internalizing behaviors, that danger is right to themselves. That may look like self-harm or things of that nature. And when the crisis peak is causing externalizing behaviors, that's usually a danger to other people. Then we come to de-escalation. This is when there's a slow process of calming down that begins, a regaining of control over their behavior. You can see the behaviors are becoming less intense. And then you have exhaustion. I don't know about all of you, but when I've experienced a really intense emotional experience, whatever that looks like, I'm tired afterwards. And the same thing happens with our students as they've experienced this crisis. And so they may be physically, mentally, emotionally drained, and they may need time to rest before they return to their baseline state. And then last is recovery, and that process of de-escalating is kind of ending. They're at reduced risk for escalating, and they're returning to baseline. So again, as I said before, not every behavioral emotional crisis will hit the crisis peak. There are opportunities at each phase to interrupt that cycle and to move to de-escalation. But again, that process takes time and it takes patience. I think sometimes in the school setting, because there's so much pressure on us as adults as well, we want to hurry along that process. But if we hurry along that process, we might actually escalate the situation or re-escalate the situation instead of allowing that de-escalation to continue. And it's important to recognize that as someone moves up on the left side, that escalation. So if they move up from catalyst, escalation begins, escalation intensifies to crisis peak. The further they move along that cycle, the less ability they'll have to communicate and problem solve. And so it's important to recognize that as that moves up, we want to have, especially at the crisis peak, we want to interact only to provide safety so that we're not asking things of a student that might escalate them or expecting things that because of where they're at in their brain, they'll be difficult. It will be difficult for them to follow through with those instructions. Okay. Again, our goal is to interrupt the cycle. Interrupt it before it gets to that crisis peak, and there's a lot of ways that we can do that. Okay, we're going to go over some principles and then we will get to our scenarios. Principles and then a couple of strategies, and then we'll get to our scenarios. So principles for safe de-escalation, we want to understand the student's baseline. The more we can understand what's going on with a student when they're in that comfortable place and that content place, the more we'll be able to support them. The more we'll be able to see as well when a catalyst happens. The second is throughout a crisis, honoring the student's need for safety, dignity, and respect. It is interesting that a lot of the perspective of a student who is experiencing or exhibiting those behaviors associated with this crisis, there's a lot of frustration, I think, that comes with the student, but a lot of research shows that a student actually feels really unsafe when they're in that situation. So the more that we can help them feel safe, the more that we can respect them, even though they're experiencing those things, the more we can also help them to de-escalate. And it's important to really respect them throughout. There's times where, maybe there's other adults in the room, and we want to talk about that student to other adults, or other students can overhear. We really just need to be respectful of that student and what they're experiencing. It's also important to recognize that, as I said before, we experience our own behavioral emotional crises. And sometimes when a student is in that crisis, we also escalate ourselves. So it's important to just be self-aware and manage your own emotions and stress in response to what's happening with the student. And it's always okay to say, I need, if there is someone else around to swap out and say, I need to step away. Also knowing that we have our own personal lives, and some of the things that may be happening with a student are what's going on in our personal lives may impact that as well. And then lastly, less is often more. This comes back to that communication. With that student's reasoning becoming increasingly inhibited, the more we can limit communication as the student moves closer to the crisis peak, the better. Again, that pressuring and prompting may lead to re-escalation. And then once the crisis has resolved, those expectations can resume. It's not saying that there won't be expectations at any point, but expectations during a crisis situation are going to frustrate both the adult and the student and may lead to escalation. Oh, I just skipped one. So emergency safety interventions, those are only used, that's physical restraint and seclusion. Those are only used by someone who is trained to use them, and they should be used as a last resort. So I'm not sure that if anyone is trained in this group to do that, but they really are to be used as a last resort, and cannot and should not be used by anyone who is not trained to use them. Sorry, keep scrolling down quickly. So strategies to invite de-escalation. Again, I think we talk about this in a lot of different places, and that is relationships and how important they are. And I think you all know that as Check and Connect mentors, because that is your role, is to build that relationship. And so the more you can know a student, the more you have that relationship with them, the more you can use their name and the importance of using their name, the more you can support and invite de-escalation. It shows, again, coming back to that principle of respect, it shows respect as well as you're talking to that student and using their name. Side cross dialogue, that is something where you are, maybe you're in a group situation where there's other students, and that might be providing an expectation for everyone in the group that's also for that student, but not calling out that student directly. So again, it's that respect. You're not calling them out and maybe making them feel embarrassed, but you're also letting them know what the expectation is for them as well. Diversion and distraction. Again, this is not something that's teaching new skills, but it's something that in the moment can support de-escalation. So it might be redirecting through visual attention. It might be asking them to do something that that's really easy for them to do. Um, that is not necessarily something they prefer, but something that's easy for them to do. That's a task that they can complete to get them going in a different direction. And it could be channeling things into a different activity. Um, so again, that's a short-term solution. There's still a lot of long-term skill building that happens, but it gets them to a place where they can de-escalate. And then lastly, sometimes we just need people to hear us. And so being able to listen to a student and then validate and reflect back what they've said. Not adding in your own thoughts at that time, not adding in your own perspectives, but just reflecting what they've said back to you. And then inviting cooperation, right? Giving them the reason behind the request. And again, this involves that relationship. Carolyn, I like what you said in the chat as well. Acknowledge them and then talk with them. Love it. Thank you. Okay, so let's get to our practice. Because I know that's what we came for, but I think it's important that we have that foundation right in the front of our minds. So we have the opportunity to go through two different experiences. Again, one, we're going to talk about the behavior. Second, we're going to talk about the adult responses. And there are, again, two scenarios. One is elementary, one is secondary. So based on who's in your group, if you work with more secondary, you can take the secondary scenario, more elementary, take the elementary scenario. These scenarios purposely leave out the adult responses so that you can then put in your thoughts on what the adult responses would be to help de-escalate throughout the process. So for part one, I am going to put this in the chat. You are going to receive oh, that is not copying. I might have to, let me just unshare for 1 second and I'll pull these up so that I can share them with you. So you're going to receive a worksheet, a scenario worksheet that's going to outline the scenarios. It's also going to give you your instructions, and it has a couple of questions for each part for you to answer in your group as well. And then you're also going to receive the crisis cycle worksheet. And that crisis cycle worksheet has the crisis cycle on it, and then it has a space for you to include both your the behavior and the adult responses. But again, we're going to focus on the behavior in part one. So I put those both in the chat. So you are going to be, Amanda's going to put you in breakout rooms. You're going to go to that breakout room for about 8 minutes just because of time. If you need more time, just put it in the chat and we can extend that time. But we're going to start with 8 minutes. So again, you're going to read one of the two scenarios. You're going to choose one of the two, read it, answer only the questions for part one. And then using that crisis cycle worksheet, you're going to input the behaviors that the student exhibited in each phase of the crisis cycle. Any questions before we head to the breakout rooms?
And
Okay.
real quick, if you didn't see it, on the bottom menu of your Zoom screen should just be a little word bubble. That's your chat that you can open there to get to those hyperlinks, just in case you guys didn't see that pop up.
Thanks, Amanda. And when you come back, just ask or assign one person to kind of report back. We're just going to have a discussion when we come back, and just make sure there's one person who's your spokesperson for your group, but obviously other people from your group can share as well.
All right. Okay. Those breakout rooms should be open now. There's probably a little pop-up in your computer screen somewhere for you to click to join. And then you'll see a broadcast that will close in about a minute when we're ready to come back.
We're getting denied access on the scenario worksheet.
Oh,
Oh,
It says we need permission.
oh, it's probably
I
you
will get you that
CEO.
access.
The crisis cycle one is fine.
Okay, I'll get everyone that access. Thank you.
And I'll let them know in the chat. If you're having a hard time moving into your breakout, just let me know. I think I can move you guys.
It's weird, Amanda, because I have it set up for them to make a copy. So
Huh,
it should
just let
it
him.
should work for that.
Okay.
That is odd. But let me just fix this access to make sure that's not causing a problem.
Sounds good.
That may mean we want to give them an extra minute or two. Okay. Now it is updated, so hopefully they can hop in and make that copy.
Okay. And I broadcast to the rooms, so they should all be able to go back in and get
Thank you.
that. Just going to go through the rooms and make sure there's at least 2 in each one real quick. Oh, they've asked for help in room 5. I'll be right back. Hi, friends.
Hi, kiddo. We're not finding any of the instruction sheet and the criteria or anything in our group here. There are
Okay,
4 of us in there, so
let
how
me
do we do that?
copy and paste that back in 1 second. I think it's because you guys are in the breakout room. It doesn't have the access right there. So let's see. Annie, I'm going to send it to you directly because you're on here for me to send it to because I'm in this room with you right now. Oh, actually, I can send it to each of you now that I see that because you'll want it so that you can
Okay.
each click on it.
And it's now
All
time for
right.
me to leave anyway. I have another meeting I have to get to. I'm visiting those kids in Crimson again, and once I
Sure.
have a scheduled time, I'm going.
Yeah,
So
you should. All
yeah,
right. They need me in another breakout rooms, friends. Hopefully that works. If not, invite me back.
thank
Hi, friends. I'm guessing you're
Hey,
also having
can
it.
you hear me?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. I don't know if anybody else can hear me because I'm not getting response from anyone.
Okay, fair. So it looks like you're in with Dave Brotherson and Lana Beal. Dave and Lana, are you with us? All right. You might be by yourself. They might have had to step away. I know sometimes folks multitask. So would you like me to move you into another room where I can see some active folks?
Sure, that would be awesome.
All right, give me just a minute. I'll do that for you.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome. We just gotta, there we go, leave room. That's how we do
Okay.
And then you should be in room 5.
How do I get back to show slide? I am in, so I can read the scenario. And how do I get back to even, there's nothing at the bottom of my, hang on. Yeah, there's nothing in the bottom of my page. Let me look up here.
On the bottom of your Zoom screen?
Nope. No, because I'm in the scenario. There's nothing at the bottom of my screen to click. Because I'm in, I don't
Carolyn,
know.
you might have 2 Zoom screens because I get that. I get like one with the pictures and people, and then I get another one with the presentation. Do you have one with like our faces in it?
Yeah, I can see you.
And there's not a menu at the top or the bottom that has.
Nope.
Okay, well, I think I can force you. Hang on one
Okay.
second. I
I
had
know I was
somebody.
trying to move her, but it would just move to another. I can just move you to another room. Is there another room that I should move her to, Amanda?
Yeah, so I would just pick one that has some folks who are actually
Let's
active in it. So,
do room 4. I'll move to
okay.
room 4.
And I'm throwing this person to 1.
Amanda,
Yeah,
hey, I was sent to room 2, but there was nobody in there.
Lisa, let me send you to 3. It looks like we got some folks working together in there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Right, you should have that open now to join room 3.
Amanda, we need to be put in a room.
Okie doke, let's move you guys over. Make sure there are people chatting.
Me too, Amanda. Please.
All right, we will get you there, Sheila. All right, Sheila, you should have like a little pop-up somewhere. It looks like you are set for room 4. Are you seeing anything like that? That says join.
No.
Okay, well, I'm going to move you to another room out of an attempt here, and then hopefully we'll give you a new pop-up.
Thanks.
All right, so about 1 more minute till I close the room, so about 2 more minutes till they come back.
Okay. Do you want to extend 1 minute just so, since there's
With the
been so many
movement?
problems with people getting in?
Yep, I will.
And am I 10 o'clock?
Yes, but I already strategized
Okay.
with Julia, and so we're not pressed about it. Because the thing about the end 15-minute breakout rooms, that's ideal. But if we have to skip it because of presentations, that's just what we're gonna do.
Okay, I'll still try to be maybe 10:05.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
And
No
because I
stress.
want to be respectful of Julia too and presentation, so.
I appreciate it. But people are excited. I think that's a good thing. There's always our fun technology barriers, but you know.
I know. I know. I thought I had everything set for the scenario too, and
That's how it works.
sometimes that happens.
My favorite game is I'll test in the morning and then Zoom will decide my screens are different when I go to reshare live. And I'm like, okay, there we go.
Yep.
Give them that 1 minute warning. That was 2 more. Right. 3, 2, 1, and they should all automatically come back.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I apologize for the technical issues with the document. Hopefully everyone was able to get in there and still have enough time to have a discussion. We tried to extend a little bit so you'd have a little bit more time. So I know that not everyone was able to get into every room, so I'm just going to ask for 3 different groups to share a little bit about the discussion they had. So we don't need to go into the details of every behavior according to the crisis cycle, but maybe if you can just share, what you learned in that process about looking at behaviors and putting them in that cycle. And then also, let's just start with that. And then we're going to come back to some of the questions that we asked. So maybe just 3 people, if you'd like to share quickly about what that process is like, what you learned about kind of going through and actually labeling where a behavior might fit within the crisis cycle.
I would say like the catalyst would be she wasn't paying attention. And so she because she was talking and she wasn't paying attention, the catalyst was right when the teacher said, "Hey, it's time to do the assignment. Let's put things away." And she had no clue what was going on. So it was more like deflecting and started to throw a fit because she just didn't know. She wasn't prepared for it.
And you're talking about the elementary
Oh.
scenario
Yes, sorry.
with Tina,
Yeah.
right?
That's the one we
And
have.
another interesting thing is she was doing something preferred and she was asked to stop something preferred, right?
Mhm.
So that sometimes looking and saying, okay, now I know at this time frame, this might be difficult. This might create a catalyst. So really, really paying attention, that might help you in the future to be able to see what might happen at that time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other thoughts about, with either scenario, about kind of what it was like to go through that process, what you learned about really labeling where a behavior might be along that cycle?
Is that the elementary setting one?
Either one.
Okay. In the secondary, my first thought was when she's working, she's doing great, but all of a sudden she gets a text and then she escalates. So to me, it went from 0 to like I say, 8 or 9. As a teacher, if you're not being receptive to monitoring that look from a child and she needs to leave or whatever, I would have stepped out in the hall and asked, "Hey, would you give her some options? Would you have liked to done this, or this, or would you like to go talk to a counselor? We'll get you a pass. You're welcome to go. I'll let them know you're coming." Just so, you feel you're in a safe environment so you can talk to somebody about whatever text she just received or whatever made her, again, you don't want her to start cutting. You want to get her to that safe place, and monitor that behavior.
Thanks, Carolyn. I love that you kind of started going into the adult responses, which is fantastic, right? But I love that. So you talked about, you may not actually know that a student receives a text, but you can be responsive to the behavior that you do see.
You can
Right?
see
And
the emotional was engaged to disengaged, and there's a sense of you can always see a child in crisis, or their face changes, their heart races. You can kind of see they can get more anxious, all of that.
so again, you're looking at the physical signs, the things that are observable, and then supporting based on that. And what you talked about with the 3 choices, that's a really great way to look at to support, especially when the escalation is beginning and the escalation is intensifying, to provide choices so that there's a sense of control. Because we talked about how when a crisis is happening, there's a lack of safety, a lack of control. So being able to provide that can help that de-escalation happen.
Yeah,
Thanks, Carolyn.
you give them the options, it provides them the ability kind of say, "Oh, this would be better for me," and they get a buy-in with it, so they're more willing to
Yep.
do an option that you've suggested.
For sure. For sure. We talk a lot about inviting and having choices from baseline as well, things that you know that they enjoy, because that will invite that de-escalation. Okay, because of time and because of what we did, we're going to go into the second breakout room. And Carolyn's kind of started us on this path. Again, we're going to look at the same scenario. And this time, I want you, if you haven't already, to have a discussion about how, as adults, you can respond to support de-escalation to help interrupt that cycle, wherever it is within the cycle. So we're going to give you, let's do 5 minutes, because I'm guessing some of you might have had a little bit of that conversation during your first breakout room. So let's give you 5 minutes and then we'll come back and discuss quickly.
Okay, let me get those rooms open. I'm going to do a few less rooms this time just because we had a little bit of movement there. All right, those should be open and you should see those pop-ups to join the different breakout rooms. Well, that went smoother this time.
Yes, it did. Amanda, I'll be back in just 1 second.
Okay.
Amanda, we are not in a room if we don't see the
We're
pop-up.
having technical difficulties.
I don't know if it's because they left me in control.
It's okay. Let me just
You let Andrea be in control this
I
time,
know.
so-
Hey, you
Like
gotta
the
take
blind
turns.
leading.
All right, I'm gonna send you to a new one just to give you a pop-up. Hopefully it will.
Thank you. Yep, it popped up.
Good, okay. Just double checking. I got a message from the breakout room, Ashley. They're just working on the adult response, right?
Correct. Yep,
All
part
right.
2.
I was correct. All right, cool.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to give them that 1 minute warning.
Awesome, thank you.
Team, I just pushed the button because it was in my face. I didn't mean to leave prematurely.
Julia's like, I'm out of here.
I'm out. See ya. There's a button. I just push it.
He's enthusiastic today, that's all. Well, the rest of the group
I feel
will
like
come
that could
back
be
in
said
about.
about Julie. Oh, sorry. I was
No,
just
it's
going to say,
okay.
I feel like that could be said about Julia every day. There's always a good enthusiasm.
She keeps us going, that's for sure. All right, we're down to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a really good, robust conversation about number one, what information you have that about student behavior, knowing what might escalate a student, and then coming up with some things that will actually help de-escalate the situation. Because of time, we won't have time to discuss those in depth. But hopefully you had those conversations in your team, and hopefully this started you on a process of thinking about how can I do something like this with an individual student that I work with that maybe exhibits some of these escalating behaviors that are consistent with the behavioral emotional crisis. The more that we can understand things ahead of time, the more we can see that even though it looks like a behavior is going from 0 to 60, there may have been some things that we could see, some behaviors that we could see before that behavior gets to a crisis. So I hope that now you have this crisis cycle worksheet. I hope that you can use that with the students that you're working with and really supporting them in the way that they need in all aspects of that crisis cycle. I do want to say quickly, there is a new requirement in rule that there is a foundational behavior support training. This is something that I think will be required for all of you, that really will go more in depth with this kind of information. It will go in depth with, here's some types of adult responses that might work at different places on this crisis cycle. So hopefully that will be helpful as well as you're going through and working with the students who may exhibit more challenging behaviors, and really find ways to support them and understand the needs that they have. I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. Feel free to reach out to me if you have additional questions or anything you need. And I don't know if it's going to go back to Amanda or Julia yet, but I want to make sure we give Julia the time with all the information that she prepared for us today. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashley. We really appreciate it. It was a twofer this school year getting you to come back, so it's a good thing for us. So thank you. And yeah, I think actually I'm sharing screen, right, Julia? That's what we decided. Oh, nope, she is. I like it even better. Okay, cool. Then I can't forget what I'm doing and put something on the screen. Good deal. All right. We'll get going.
Yeah, I'd rather share that way. I can just control if I want to go.
I love it.
That's okay. It's a control issue. But no, I've really appreciated, Ashley, your presentation on these phases. I was thinking like, oh, we could probably incorporate this in a number of different ways, and thinking about how as mentors, sometimes we're not there during that initial event and we come after the fact, right? And so like helping us understand those phases and how that affects our connect meetings with students could be really awesome. It also could help a lot in how we maybe share information with teachers or with parents. Help, like if we understand those phases and help break down those phases for them too, that could be really powerful. So thank you, Ashley. Appreciate that. Okay, before people see my slide here, my well, you all have seen it. But before you're like, oh, I'm a prevention mentor, this doesn't apply to me, I'm out. This does apply to you. So while this is heavy on DCFS, all of us as mentors might run into experiences with DCFS. So YIC is when that student comes into custody. Everything before that is not YIC, right? Those CPS investigations, the removal of children happen sometimes with students that you might be serving. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, that this I think is applicable for all of you to just have an understanding of what training our DCFS caseworkers are receiving about education. This is a training that I worked with DCFS during last summer, so that at the beginning of this school year, all DCFS staff, including CPS, the ongoing workers, the in-home workers, received. And I thought it might be helpful to share this information with you. I think there's a lot of power in knowledge and trying to understand each other's positions, right? So this is not an in-depth training by any means, and I'm just going to kind of review it with you. But I think when we understand each other, we can hold each other accountable too. So I want you to see what they're learning, but I also want you to see what they're learning about you as mentors, and so that they can hold you accountable to the fidelity of the program. So that is my goal for today. And there is a lot of information. I do want to get through the info, but I also want to answer your questions. And so I'm going to try to get through the information. If you could write your questions in the chat or on a piece of paper, so that at the end we can discuss them. If you put them in the chat and it's relevant right in that moment, then maybe we'll address them then, but we might come to them at the end if that's okay. I really usually like very interactive trainings, but this is one that I'm trying to share with you all this information. I want to make sure we have enough time. Also, I invited Jennifer Red, who is our education liaison at DCFS, to join us. She was going to do her very best to get here. And if she's not here now, maybe at least by that 15 minutes, so that if you have any specific questions for her, you can. But she's a very busy lady, and so she was going to do her best to get here. All right, I'm going to jump in. So like I said, this training was created by DCFS and Education, and it's a virtual training that they complete. It's just an online click and read training. And so what I have learned throughout the years as I've talked to DCFS, I'm like, well, in your training that you received, your mandatory training, they're like, what training? So just know that it is mandatory for all DCFS, but the message was not completely clear to all of our DCFS staff. So that might just be, if you bring this up and they don't know what you're talking about, be like, oh, you should go back and talk to the training team about that training, and hold them accountable to completing the training as they should. All right, this training was broken down into 5 sections. So I'm just going to break down and just do a little review of each 5 section. The first one is the importance of education. Second section was best interest determination. Third, individualized education plans. Fourth, youth and care program. And fifth, safe. I'll explain all of those to you here. So the first thing that the training breaks down is why is it important for our kids in custody, or not in custody, just the kids in general? Why is education so important? And so they share a lot of data. And so I just wanted to share the data with you today. The data that they received looks a little bit different because they had 2023 data, but I'm giving you current 2024 data because that is what we have currently. And so when you're looking at these stats, maybe if you want to throw in the chat, what kind of, I don't know, what is standing out to you with these statistics when you're looking at DCFS versus the general population?
Difference in graduation rate, dropout rates, those are huge.
They're huge, right? A lot of people too are saying GPA. Like that was one, like as I was going through this data, I was like, okay, so a 10 or a like 15, what is that? 16% difference between high school graduation is pretty significant. But it's really exciting to me that we're at, 72% of graduates coming from DCFS. High school dropout, that's pretty high, but that GPA, man, that is rough. That is really rough, right? And so when you're thinking about our kids that are in care or our kids that are being served by DCFS, these are our like most at-risk youth. These are kids that are at the potential of being removed from their homes. And education, their outcomes are not great. And so putting emphasis on education for our students in care or for our students being served by DCFS is critical. Yeah, thank you for those in the chat. Like credit recovery is huge. Like getting them caught up, paying attention to their education is really important. We also know that education is one of the greatest protective factors students can have. They spend they spend more time, at school than they often do like in their homes in the evenings. And so helping our DCFS folks recognize how important education is critical. So it goes through some of that information. The next piece of that is that we discuss the topic of best interest determination. I think I might actually to this slide first, and then I'm going to go back to that other slide. So when we think about our kids that are in care, especially as they're transitioning, especially if maybe they come into custody, those kids are being pulled in a lot of, right? They're getting removed from their home, potentially their school. They're getting removed from their neighborhoods and their extended family, right? Like their whole life is disrupted. And so when we're thinking about education, that's one area that we don't necessarily need to disrupt. And so there is federal language in the Every Student Succeeds Act, and it's also in the Education Secondary, the ESEA. I can't remember what that refers to, but there's federal language in there that actually requires what's called a best interest determination. And that best interest determination is a process in which educational partners and our child welfare partners work together to determine if it's in the best interest for that student to stay in their school of origin, whatever school they're currently at, or to move schools. And this happens at removal. So with some of you that are prevention mentors, if you have DCFS involved and there's potential of removal, this happens at that time. And then it also happens anytime a student makes a placement change. And so there is a specific process that is supposed to occur to determine that best interest determination. And that absolutely 100% needs to include our education partners. So DCFS, if maybe they are a CPS worker, they're looking to remove a child, you might, as their mentor, actually be the best person to talk to about the student, about would it be better for the student to stay at their current school or to move schools, depending on wherever they're placed. And so this could be something that you're pulled in as a mentor to do. You that are YIC mentors, you know that you have students that are transitioning and transferring schools all the time. And oftentimes without you knowing, right? But there's actually federal language that says we're supposed to talk to you before they move. And so this is something we're trying to help better educate DCFS on, is the importance of this best interest determination, that you're part of every conversation if that student is going to transfer schools. It's triggered when the student enters foster care as well as when they have placement changes. And then also the conversation of transportation becomes part of that conversation. So if we've decided, well, a student can't really stay here because they live too far away or because like the bus won't get them here, you as the school and DCFS have to work that out together. So just because transportation is an issue should not be the reason we move a student. And so this whole idea is to lessen the amount of changes that students need to go through. In this gray box in my slide, this is actually in the training. It pops up like right before they move on to the next section that says, don't make this decision on your own. So that best interest determination, also known as a bid, should not happen on your own. The decision to change a child's school should be done in a setting of a robust child and family team meeting, collaborate with school personnel and YIC supports. So we're really doing our best to try to emphasize that. And stuff happens, right? Like kids go AWOL. There's still going to be times that you go to meet your kid and they're not there. That's going to happen still for various reasons. But the best we can hold our DCFS counterparts accountable to having those conversations with us, and having your voice in that conversation of a student moves school or not is essential. So I just wanted to show you this data too. The mobility of our students is pretty significant. So our DCFS kids are moving at least once during the school year, if not multiple times, at a 52% rate versus a 10% rate for the general population. So that's another one of those like, oh, yeah, we got to do better. Also, I think it's critical to know when we move schools, each school change puts youth academically behind 3 to 6 years, or 3 to 6 months. Well, that would be insane, 3 to 6 years, but 3 to 6 months. And then also just staying in the same school improves academic performance, relationships. Parents are more engaged when they have a connection to the school. And so it makes your job a lot easier if we can keep kids where they're at. And yes, Destiny, you can get a copy of these slides. So I think it's just important for us to think about our students. So when you have a student moving and the automatic decision is let's move that student, that should not be the automatic decision. We should be keeping kids in their school of origin if that's what's truly in their best interest. Okay. So I know that was a lot and maybe a lot of new information. This is something that's been around since 2015, right? But we're doing our best to kind of bring Utah into more compliance and helping our students remain in their schools. And there are laws that are out there that protect this, right? So there's federal language, but there's even state language. So if a school pushes back and says, well, they're not in our boundaries anymore, well, there's actually state language that says if a student is in foster care, they can go to whatever school the team decides. And so there are things that support keeping kids in school of origin. And so if you're getting pushback, if you as a team feel like this is important, if you're like, oh, there can't be a bus, well, guess what? Federal language says we have to work out transportation between the two of us. So there shouldn't be just a blanket, the kid moves, so does the school. Okay. All right, I want to just check in about questions, but I think I'm going to move on. Write your questions down if you have them, and we will get to them. Okay, section 3 of this training is all about individualized education plans. And so we have discussed individualized education plans. We've had many trainings here. Many of you are well equipped with that. And so I'm not going to go over like, what is an IEP? What is a 504? I just want you to know what your DCFS counterparts have learned about individualized education plans. So remember that we're at nearly 40% of students in foster care that have specialized education needs. And so that's a pretty significant number, and that's only of those that have been identified. So think about all of the students that have come in and that you're working with, or the students that are working with DCFS that you're working with that haven't really been attending school a lot. Nobody's really identified them as like, done a child find or done any assessments. Think how much more that number could potentially increase if we really could get a good tab on all of our students that are mobile and that are not attending school and that have all of those challenges already. And so it's important to understand how IEPs work, especially for our DCFS partners. So the training includes information on what is the difference between an IEP and a 504. It includes information on attending IEPs. There's a lot of confusion about who gets to sign the IEP as the parent or guardian. DCFS, I even know like when I came to this position, I was like, of course DCFS can sign as the parent. They are the legal custody and guardian, but I'm seeing a lot of you shake their heads. But that was my interpretation, right? I didn't know better, but now I do. Actually, our DCFS partners cannot sign as the parent. And so this training goes through who can sign as the parent, what would be the order of preference, and information along those lines. So if you have DCFS asking questions, you can refer them back to this training, or there's lots of other materials that can help support this conversation. And I see that Jennifer has joined us, so we're excited. Jennifer, I'm just going through the training and we're going to open it up for questions here in just a minute. This training also talks about, I'm going to kind of read the chats. Amanda, if there are really good things there's going to be lots of good things, but if there are things that you think are really pertinent to say out loud, please help me.
All right, fair enough. I think we're good. So keep going.
Okay, great. Okay, the other thing is talking about parental involvement, what that looks like for students that are in, especially once they enter custody. I think it's important to recognize, I know that I had a lot of cloudy information, crossing over from DCFS to education about what education rights look like for parents, thinking, well, that's one of those that they don't really have anymore. Not true. Parents still have educational rights, and so we need to be treating them as such. We need to be informing them of things. They need to be invited to IEPs. There are certain reasons why we might not include them, and those are listed here. Parents' rights have been terminated, there's a protective order in place, or we've tried to connect with them and they just haven't responded. So those would be the only 3 reasons why our biological parents don't have, or just our parents. Parents can be lots of different things, but why they wouldn't have education rights. Additional tips that the training provides to our DCFS folks on individualized education plans is that caseworkers should request IEPs from the student's school. So one of the things that the federal language says is that we need to have timely enrollment and timely transfer of process, like paperwork and transfer of students in schools when they do change schools. And one of the biggest hangups, and I can see some of you that I know we've dealt with this, like Kelly, I'm looking at you specifically, right? Like we have had some of these experiences where it has taken so long to get those IEPs transferred. And that's for a myriad of reasons. Every LEA, there's 144 local education agencies, okay? There is one DCFS agency. And so sometimes our DCFS partners don't understand how complicated working 144 LEAs can be with very different systems. So helping our DCFS partners understand that just pushing a button is not going to transfer everything. So it's really helpful if they up front have a copy of that IEP. And this is where you can help, right? You have a caseworker that you're working with, whether they're in custody or not in custody, you have a caseworker you're working with, and they need some paperwork, get it for them, right? Make a copy of that IEP, provide it to them so that they can have it in their records. So if that student transitions, they don't even have to come back to you to get it. They can just give that new information to the next school. So that's one area that we can help. And yes, like that IEP is critical in helping determine where that student is going to land at their next school, right? And making sure all of their accommodations are met. So, so we really encourage our DCFS partners to get a copy of that IEP, and then that they need to inform the schools to transfer those IEPs. There has been a number of times that I've been out in your programs and we see that a student is struggling. They don't have an IEP, and we're like, well, let's just go back through their history of schools and see if maybe ever there was an IEP. And there have been times that we've gone back, we've looked through the data gateway, and we're like, guess what? They did have an IEP 3 schools ago. It just never made it to where they are now. And so just helping our caseworkers be able to help transition those IEPs is really critical and important. And then also, it's really helpful if they do have an IEP, if caseworkers are communicating what those IEPs look like to their general child and family team. And so that's part of the training as well. And I would encourage you to do that. If you're attending child and family team meetings and you know that there is an IEP, going through what that IEP's goals and accommodations are is really helpful. Knowledge is power. And sometimes our parents, the people that we work with, don't really understand all of the needs of our kids at school, right? That's one part of their life. They're dealing with the other part of their life. And so information is power, right? And so helping our caseworkers be able to complete these tasks, I think we can be a huge asset in making their lives easier. All right, the next section is we discuss what the youth and care program looks like. And so for those of you that are prevention mentors, maybe this is eye-opening for you of what the youth and care program looks like. But the training discusses what is YIC. It talks about what is Check and Connect, and we do go through the 4 pillars of the check and connect model in that training. So our DCFS workers are learning that there is a mentor, right? So that if my kid is in custody, I know that they have a mentor. If my kid is at risk of going into custody, they could potentially have a mentor. And so it's worth me asking that question. Does this student have somebody specific at their school district that they're working with? And then the second one is the check piece. So we talked to them about how you review data and how you have that data at your fingertips to share with them. And so that's really great. We talked to them about Connect and how you're meeting with those students each week, which I think is often eye-opening for our DCFS partners. They're like, wait, what? Our mentors know these kids better than we do? Maybe I should talk to them a little bit because they understand the needs of our students better than we do because we're not with them all the time. And then we also talk about the importance of family engagement. So all of those are discussed in the training. I'm going to pause here for just a quick second. I see a lot of chat in the
yeah, so the most recent question, are mentors supposed to be working with all students in DCFSs, or excuse me, with all students DCFS is working with in schools?
Yeah, and no. So there is potential. So if DCFS is doing like an in-home case, so maybe there's the court involvement, but they're not in custody, there's some wiggle room for that. So if that comes to your attention, you as a YIC mentor could potentially serve that student, but you're not required to. YIC is required when that student does enter custody and you receive that student information sheet that they are in custody. But if they're working with DCFS, I'm just saying a lot of you prevention mentors might be you're working with at-risk kids. These at-risk kids often are coming from homes that are struggling, right? And so you might already be working them as a prevention mentor. Ashley, if it comes to your attention that, hey, we have this kid, your partnership with DCFS is such that they're like, hey, it would really help this student if they had a mentor, we could definitely put that into play. There's flexibility there.
Thank you. The other conversation was a question about if a parent's in jail, and I suggested it's where that third idea comes into play with reasonable attempts. And then our amazing Melissa came in with some additional conversation and suggestions on how to support getting that parent connected to the IEP meeting.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Okay, additionally, when we're talking with our DCFS folks and in the training, we talk about the enrolling of a youth in care, and that student information form needs to be completed prior to enrolling students. And we know that oftentimes kids get lost in the cracks because that's not happening. But we're re-emphasizing that for our DCFS partners. And we're re-emphasizing that those student information sheets it's not just a one-time sheet you complete and you're done. It happens at the beginning of every school year. We should be receiving those anytime a youth changes placements. And then, or this is, I think, an eye-opener for maybe some of you, is if the caseworker changes, a new form should be completed so that you're informed of any changes that are happening. And so that's what we're informing DCFS, and I think that's what you can encourage to keep our folks, our DCFS partners accountable to. And then also, who enrolls the student? There's a lot of confusion. I know in there's 5 regions of DCFS in the state. I know in one of the regions they were saying only caseworkers can enroll. That's not true. Caseworkers can enroll, but it's often better when a placement, so the foster home or the proctor home, enroll the student, because they have it's just better for a lot of more information. Then they can have access to the students, like student information system. There's just a lot of things that I think are better when a foster parent enrolls a student. There are some nice things about having DCFS enroll, but anyway, so that's who can enroll, just foster parents or the caseworker. All right, and lastly, in the training, they go through and talk about how to update education information in SAFE. SAFE is DCFS's student information system. It's their Power School, Skyward, whatever that looks like. They have just one database. It's called SAFE. All caseworkers throughout the whole state use that one database. That's why when they can't quite understand all the time. Sometimes they get it, but sometimes it takes a lot of words to help them understand that I can't just check a button and have that student's information transferred, right? There are 144 different ways this happens because they only have one. If a caseworker changes, it's really just a matter of hitting a couple buttons and then that whole case transfers to. So they have information to everything in SAFE. And so that's kind of a hard thing to understand for some of our folks, which is why it's helpful for you to help push documentation along to the next school that they're going to or to receive it from the school they're coming from. But we talked to them about why it's so important that that information is updated in SAFE. And maybe it's not as important for you, but it's definite, well, it kind of is important for you because that information, if their information is updated, we make sure that you're funded appropriately, that you have enough mentors in your districts to support the YIC students there, that we don't lose our students, right? So we receive a quarterly report from DCFS that gives me a list of all the kids that are in custody. And then we break that up and we send it to you directly to make sure we're not losing kids. But if caseworkers are not updating that information, then it's wrong. And you know, some of you have seen that list and you're like, I don't know this kid. I don't know this kid. And it's usually because the information has not been updated. But it's important that that happens effectively. And so the training includes how to do that for our DCFS partners. All right, that was a lot. I feel like I just rushed that, but I did want to make sure that we got through all of the 5 components of the training and didn't run out of time. So if there were questions in the chat, Amanda, that you think are good to bring up now, or if you'd like to come off mute and add or have any other specific questions about what we just covered, I'd like to take a few minutes now, and then in about 10 minutes, or as soon as we wrap this up, we'll do our breakouts. And if you have very specific questions for me and Jennifer, then you can ask those there as well. So we'll have 2 opportunities to answer any questions.
That sounds great, Julia. In the chat, we have, what school information are foster parents allowed to have access to?
All of it. So if they have, they're welcome to have, like, I know as a parent, I'm able to get into Skyward and see all of my kids' grades, and all of those foster parents should be able to do the same. If they have questions about credits and all of those things, right? Our foster parents, and Jen, correct me, but they're responsible. DCFS has custody of that student, but these placements have physical custody. And so they're responsible to get those kids to school, to make sure, you know, their needs are, their basic needs are met, to get them food, clothing, all of those things. And so if you think about it in that way, education is just as critical as food. And so we want them to be well equipped with the information they need to be able to provide what they need to provide to that student for education. So I think that's a great question, Ashley, because I know we often want to be like, everyone wants to protect the information of students, right? Because we hear that all the time, confidentiality, confidentiality, confidentiality. But if that student is in that home, then that home has the right to that information. Jen, did you have more to add?
I was just going to add, when I was a foster parent, if I had a student, a youth in my home that had an IEP, I would also get a copy of the IEP so that I could help support that. And I know the school districts I worked with would look into law usually because they were unsure, but they never found anything that prevented them from giving me as a foster parent a copy of that IEP even. And so that's, I made a comment earlier in the chat as well, that unless there's that no contact order, we need to try and include, and this is the part that gets forgotten, is not as much about the foster parents, it really is about the birth parents. We need to try and include both parents unless parental rights have been terminated or that no contact order is in place in all meetings with the school. Sometimes if there's like a disciplinary action, birth parents get left off of that and the foster parents are the one that get the phone call. We need to try and make efforts to have both parties so that birth parent also knows what's going on with their child in school until they no longer have rights or if there's a no contact order. But yeah, to answer this question, all information should go to the foster parents as well.
Yeah. And that's great. I'm seeing in the chat too, Amanda, saying we also send weekly updates, which is so awesome. And so if including, you know, you send out your email to the caseworker, to the foster parent, to the bio parent, you know, BCC everyone or whatever, one thing or one email multiple parties, that could go a long way. So I'm glad to see that. Oh, and you too. Thank you, Carolyn. Those weekly updates. That's great.
Carolyn asked in the chat that we should be discussing this with caseworkers so they know who's getting those weekly updates and keeping them included in the conversation also.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm trying to think if the training specifically says that mentors will send them information. I know we talk about the check data. But I don't know that it goes into a lot of detail about how to incorporate bio parents with the education information. I think that would be a good place, Jen, for us to think about as we're moving forward too, is how to help our caseworkers include bio parents. I think as YIC specifically, and even you prevention mentors that are working with bio parents, you want to be cautious, right? Like you don't want to assume that every parent can have all access because they might have a protective order issue or there might be a challenge where information is shared. And this actually brings up a really good point. Foster parents, their information is confidential, right? So while you can share all the student information with those foster parents, when they register kids for school, they put in their address. We don't want their address shared with bio parents. And so be cautious of when you're sharing student information with bio parents that it doesn't include confidential private information of the foster parent. Does that make sense? So we don't have anything, and this is something that I'm working on at the state level. There's no way to hide foster parents' information in our student information systems. And so we as mentors need to just be cognizant of, like, when you send transcripts home with a kid that's returning home, make sure you're blacking out the address that's on that transcripts because it is the foster parent's address. And so we need to be cognizant of what information we're sharing. Share the information about the student if that's appropriate, but try to provide some confidentiality for those placements. I saw a hand up. Shirlene, who?
It was Dawn, I think. Dawn, did you have a question?
I was going to share something, but I decided I'd just wait until Julia was done and then I would just share it to make sure you get through your presentation.
I appreciate it. Dawn, you're welcome to share now. I think now is a good time.
Okay, so I had a recent dilemma with parents not being invited and having the rights to come, but the caseworker wasn't able to make it. And so it was the school staff, their LEA and, the school staff, and I was there. And it was a disaster. And so my recommendations would be to make sure that caseworker can attend as well so that they can, because sometimes there's a lot of hostility between foster parents and family members. Mostly when I fostered, they just were angry at the system and they weren't accepting responsibility while their kids were in custody. So they were automatically mad at me or anyone else. And that wasn't always the case, but this was, it involved some violence that was angry, yelling, slamming on things. And this principal said, we need to have the DCFS worker there because they know them. They can be a liaison between the school and the biological parents and foster parents. So that's just a rule of thumb that I think I'm going to go by is absolutely parents can be there, but we need you there to represent and be a support to the team when it comes to the biological parents. And that's not always the case, but I've had two recently with a grandma as well that got ugly. Caseworker couldn't be there, asked if I would help facilitate her being in the meeting. So I just feel, what are your thoughts on that, Julia? And
no, I think that's a really great practice, Dawn. I know that it's kind of like my kids coming to me for money and then going to their dad for money and then all of a sudden have a lot, right? Like we do a lot of triangulating, and this doesn't always happen, like you said, Don. I appreciate you being sensitive to that. It's not always going to be a problem, but for those times that it is a problem, I think having all the relevant parties so that we're not doing any triangulating or misinformation or he said, she said stuff, having everyone present, I think is really valid. And so maybe, yeah, when you are holding team meetings, you're inviting the parent, bio parent like you're supposed to, having that kind of like in the back of your mind requirement of make sure DCFS is also present, I think can go a long way.
Yeah, and
So
this was
it's
an
a really good
IEP
tip.
meeting. So most of the CFTMs are online, but this was an actual in-person meeting both times. And, so I just feel like, the caseworker can kind of help mediate feelings, and they know both parties. They know the biological family, they know the foster family. There's just sometimes, you just need that extra support. And so I think that's going to be my rule of thumb is absolutely. And we would love, we want to make sure that you're there too, so that we have all parties there.
Yeah, and Carolyn just brought a really great point up in the chat as well, as the IEP form is for the child and their support's not for a session of them to complain. And so helping our caseworkers, helping our foster parents, helping our bio parents understand the purpose of the meeting and that it's and what it's about can go a long way too, to kind of maybe if you're thinking of the phases of escalation, right, that we just learned, like preventing that max escalation by just providing some basic information before you even walk through the doors, I think can go a long way too.
I would add to this. Oh, sorry. I was going to say I would add to it as well, though. Ask if a caseworker is not available, ask if their supervisor or someone else is.
Yep.
Like, you don't have to just take the answer of like, oh, the caseworker couldn't be here, so it has to all be back on us. Ask them if someone else from their DCFS team is available, such as a supervisor or another caseworker that can fill that spot.
And going off of that as well is the fact that previously I had contacted bio parents if it's an issue with DCFS and things like that, and if they can't be there but they want a voice, I ask them to fill out a summary. What are their concerns? What are some pros and cons? What do you think they're struggling with? So they feel they have a voice, but it's done. I can provide that and say this is what they're having, and it's just written, and I can give that in my IEP meeting, so they still feel they have a voice if they're not there. It's still something that a parent can feel validated that they're still a part of the child's IEP and school.
That's great. Thank you. All right, I'm going to bring this to just conclude this right now. Your questions are awesome. We're going to have another opportunity for questions. I'm going to turn the time back over to Amanda. I know she was going to provide several places if you have specific questions to go to, and so we can continue this conversation in our breakout group.
Perfect. Thank you, Julia. Let me pop open the breakout rooms and recreate them. So I'm going to go ahead and make just 2 today. So the first one, you can join Julia and Jennifer Red to continue this conversation. And then breakout room number 2, I'm going to send the amazing Charlene Hicken to. She is one of our Check and Connect trainers. She's also a mentor and a counselor, knows all the Check and Connect things. So you're welcome to go chat with Charlene about any problems of practice or questions you have. And then in the main breakout room, you can stay here and chat with me about the training schedule that will be released soon for the next school year. So those rooms should be open now. Again, room 1, chat about our continued conversation about the DCFS presentation. Breakout 2, meet with Charlene and talk about any problems of practice, or go ahead and stay here with me and I'll give you a little bit of a preview for the upcoming year's training schedule. And if you're having any technical difficulties, I'll do my best to move you to a room. Welcome back. Sorry to interrupt the conversations, everyone. I'm certain that you guys probably could have taken longer to ask more questions, but we are at time. So thanks again for joining me today for our webinar, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon at a summer conference or at the fall trainings. Take care and have a great spring. Thank you.
Wait, Amanda. Wait, Amanda.
Yes, yes.
Amanda. Oh, can you hear us?
Yeah.
No.